Kia ora team, and welcome back to this video series on everything you need to know to make websites. If you've been following along, you are probably used to this website here, a Whale of the Year. And it's a very nice website, we've got some cool styling on here, but one of the things that you may notice is it doesn't really look like a typical website. Normally, when we see a website, it looks something more like this. And what you'll notice about this website is that content is kind of put across the page in different areas. We've got this area across the top here, we've got navigation along the left, and then everything in the middle even is kind of in this sort of columns and rows. Going back to our website, we can see that everything is kind of moved over to the left hand side. This is what we call a single column website. There's actually only one column here, and all of our content is sitting within that one column. Going back to the YouTube website here, you can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 columns that we've got information sitting within, and then we've got multiple rows as well. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to make a new website that looks like this one here, Tree of the Year, and you can notice that I've put the content into column and rows. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 columns here, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows as well. This method will allow you to make more advanced websites that are more like what you see in the real world. Now, the most important thing with a grid-based website is that you think in advance about where things are going to go. I didn't start with this website and kind of make it up as I went along. It makes your life very difficult if you want to change things later on. So what you want to do is you want to wireframe your project first. You want to think about where are the different things going to go, how many columns and rows am I going to have. Once you've dashed your outline to that, you can come in, you can start putting where things are going to go. So from my example, I've got a space for my banner image at the top for my navigation, then I've got a space over to the right for my tree image that I'm going to put in there. I've got some space for my references at the bottom, and then spaces for all my different trees of the year that people are going to learn information about. Once you've done that, if you like, you might want to come in and then start putting a little bit of more wireframing detail into your website so you can kind of imagine where things are going to go. And once you've got that, you'll have a good idea of what it is that you're building, and I can see that I need about 4 columns and 5 rows to start off my website. Okay, let's actually start setting up this website. If we go to our old friend Visual Studio Code, I'm going to assume that you know the basics of HTML and CSS. See the other videos that I've done if you don't know about those. So what have I already got in here? I've got my setup for my HTML. You may notice some new information here like lang, en, or meta character set. These are just telling the browser what language and character set that I'm using. You may also notice some information in here. Don't worry about that now, we'll come to that later. What I do want you to focus on first is in my body I have this, a container. So you may remember that a div is a container. It's like a box where we can put things into, and I've given this container a class called container. So this class here is going to be what we use to set up our grid. Now our website needs some content as well, so in here I've set up some content as well. Each of my sections is going to be in its own container. So for banner, we have a div here that has a class called banner, and everything that I want, in this case it's just going to be this banner image here, is inside of that container. Then next I have my navigation section. In here I've got a bunch of links. Those are going to be my navigation icons, so these ones up here. And you can see that they're inside a div or a container as well, and that one has a class called navigation. How did I come up with the class names of container, banner, and navigation? Well, banner and navigation are just sensible names for me to call those, so I know what they are. And container is a convention. It's what we pretty much always call our grid container. If we go down, then it's the same thing for all the different parts of my website. So I've got a div for all of my trees with all of their individual names and classes for them, and then at the bottom I have a div for my footer area where I've got my references with a class called footer. I also have one here for the big tree image on the right hand side of the page here. So your job now then is to go set up the HTML of your website. If I was to set mine up like this, I could, if I comment out my style sheet here and save this up, show you what your website will look like at this stage. It'll look something sort of more like this. This is a single column website, okay, so it doesn't actually have any grid styling in it yet, and you can see everything just kind of runs top to bottom in a single column. So that's what it looks like when I started it off, but don't worry, we'll come in and add some CSS. So then the important thing to set up is this line here, so we can link to our style sheet, and then we're going to set ourselves up a style.css file. If you don't know how to do that, check out the old video, but you can see in here I have a bunch of CSS, and it looks quite long and complicated, but actually it's mostly a repeat of the same things over and over again. So let me break this down for you. Firstly, each of my areas, each of my classes has its own CSS here. So if I go back and I look in here, I've got banner, I've got navigation, I've got tree moko, I've got tree pahurakawa, etc, etc. In here I'm going to be able to find all of those. Tree moko, tree pahurakawa, banner, navigation, and all of those, all they actually need to start off with is they just need grid area. And that tells the grid which area this class belongs to. So the grid area of banner belongs to the banner class. So anything that gets banner as a class, we expect to be in the grid area banner. That will make more sense soon, but for now, all you need to know is that each of your div classes needs its own class set up, and then the grid area for that class in there. Okay, the next thing you need to know to set up the grid is the most important part, which is this container class that we set up at the beginning. So remember, this is the div that everything sits within. So this div with the class of container has everything inside it. If I click on that, it's not until I get to the right to the bottom here that you can find everything is inside this. So this is our container. What are we putting in here? Well, first we're going to put a line that says display grid. That just tells the browser that we want to display our website as a grid, please. How do we want that grid displayed? Well, grid-template-columns tells me that I want 4 columns. How do I know I want 4 columns? Because there are 4 different sizings in here. I want each of my columns to be 1 fractional unit wide. What does that mean? So a fractional unit, if I go back here and I refresh this now that I've enabled my CSS, is a proportion of the screen. For example, this is 1 fraction of the screen, 1 fraction of the screen, 1 fraction of the screen, 1 fraction of the screen. I've got 4 here, a total of 4 fractions, right? And each one is taking up 1. So if I've got 4, each one of those is 1 over 4. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing 4 columns, each taking up 1/4 of the screen, 1 fractional unit. Then for my rows, I can see that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows in here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 at the bottom there. Note that the image and the text for each tree is within the same row. So for these, they're not all the same size. You can see that the banner is much bigger than my nav bar, etc. So these take up different fractional units, 0.2, 0.15, 1, 1, 0.25. And I can demonstrate the difference there. So if we take this nav bar here and we go, actually, I want this to be 1 fractional unit. I refresh my page, you can see that now this area is much, much bigger. So 0.15 is about where it's at for me. And I didn't just come up with these off the top of my head. It's not like some super skill that you need to learn. I just kind of went, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. I looked at what was there, and then I kind of made some of them bigger and some of them smaller until I got something that looked about right to me. So you don't need to kind of have some magical arcane knowledge of how big fractional units are. And by the way, you don't have to use fractional units. There are other units you can use as well. We just use those because they're generally the best one to use and to think about when you're doing it. But the thing to remember about grid template rows and columns is the number of different values that you've got in here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sets out the number of columns and rows that you've got, and then the size of those units, like 1 fractional unit or 0.2 fractional units, tells you how big each of those columns and rows is going to be. Right, onto grid template areas. So what we've got here is a visual or graphical representation of what the website is going to look like in the grid. For my first row, you can see I've got banner, 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 banner. What I'm saying is in this first row here, 0.2 FR, for each of these columns, column 1, 2, 3, 4, I want to be banner. Then for the next row, I want all of them to be navigation. Then for the third one, things start to change. I want the first column to be tree wanaka, the second column to be tree tane, the third to be tree slope, and the fourth to be BG tree. And if we look here, we can see that that's true. The first column here is my wanaka tree, second is tane mahuta, third one is that slope point tree, and the fourth one is this here. And this continues for the rest of my website. The next row, tree lonely, tree moko, tree pahutakawa, and BG tree, we can see that we've got those 4 things there. And then finally, the bottom one down here, 3 lots of footer, and then BG tree over to the right. Now we can see this another way. If I right click on this website and I go in spec page, and then in here in layout, I click on my grid, you can see that it overlays the grid onto my website. It can show me the names for each of these areas, it can show me the columns, and it can show me the rows as well. So that's something that can be quite useful to you when you're figuring out where stuff is. Right, the final two things in here, you don't actually need these, but they can be quite useful. Min height 97 VH just means that I would like my grid to take up my entire viewport, the entire vertical width, or technically 97% of it. You can put 100, but sometimes things go weird. You won't actually see a difference on mine because there's so much content in there, but if you had very little content, this would just make sure that your grid takes up the entire vertical width of your screen. Then grid gap is a gap between the different elements of your grid. So if I go back onto here, or if I go here, you can see there's a little gap between each of these images. If I were to take out this grid gap, then there's no gap between my grid parts, and you can see everything is pushed up right next to each other. So this was just kind of a styling thing for me. I like it more when it's got the little gap between each element of the grid, so that's up to you. As I move down, each of my containers has its own class. So looking back here, you can remember that this div here has a class of banner, this one has navigation, this one has tree moko, etc. Each of them have their own class. You may notice that some of them I put some extra information into. So for example, the footer has color right here using an RGB method this time to pick this color and then a margin of 0. That means that anything with the footer class will have that. So for example, any text will have that gray color there. So if I go down into my HTML, anything in the class footer in which I have my references will have also this color as well as being the grid area footer. So what does that look like? Down here you can see that all of this text has been colored that kind of washed out gray. You can also see in here I've got a background color for my body, so that's just setting the background color of my website. I've got some CSS in here for my navigation bar, that's just to make it this color, to make it span across the entire width of the screen and to do this hover effect. Then down the bottom I've got this section on responsive design. So what on earth is responsive design? Well, if we go back here and I kind of minimize this, you can see that if I was to bring this to be smaller, it pops like that. Suddenly it's gone to this view where it's into columns for my content here. So if I go a bit bigger, you'll remember that everything was in 4 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I pop it down, it goes into 1, 2, 3 columns. That's to design for people that are on tablets. Their screen is not going to be as wide as the monitor that I'm currently on right now. I'm on a screen attached to my laptop, so that when people are on a tablet or a smaller size screen, it will fit nicely on the screen for them. And in fact, there's actually something called mobile first design, where you should design first for mobile before you go for desktops or laptops or the like, because most people are on mobile. I can't actually make this small enough, this window, to show that to you, but what I can do is I can inspect the page here and I can click this on here and it will allow me to mess with how big the viewport is. There we go. So that's sort of like a tablet size, and then if I go down to more of a mobile size, you can see that now it goes into a single column view for when people are on mobile, and I've made my tree just kind of really small and at the bottom there instead. I've also made it so my navigation bar becomes this vertical one rather than the horizontal one. So that's what responsive design is. We can change how our website looks based on the size of the screen that the user is on. And if I turn this back on, you'll be able to see how my grid is changing as well. So how do we do that? Well, if we go back to our old friend VS Code, we've got this here, and it looks like quite a lot, but it's actually me repeating myself multiple times. There is this bit about the background tree here that I've set its width to 100% of its container. I'm not going to get too into it, but basically what that means is the div that tree is sitting in, it's always going to take up 100% of that div or that container area. Moving on, we've got this here, a media query, at media. So what I'm saying is at media, max width 770 pixels. That's about the size of a tablet. So in a modern website, you would have bunch of these media queries potentially, or you could use a different method. So here I'm just going, okay, at about 770 pixels, any size of screen smaller than that, it's probably a tablet. Notice that I'm always working biggest to smallest in here. So I've got a container, and it's the same one that I set up at the very beginning. So if I go up to the top, my grid container, and then what I'm saying is, okay, when the screen gets to a max width of 770 pixels, I want you to change to be like this. I want you to become 3 columns instead of the 4 that we had, each 1 fractional unit in size. I want you to to automatically size the rows. So that's something that's quite useful to us. We can automatically size the rows by putting auto in there. And this is what I want the grid to look like. Remember, this is that graphical or visual representation. So now I want these to be on 1, 2, 3 different rows. And then this is how I want them to be laid out across my columns: tree Wanaka, tree Tane, BG tree, etc, etc. Then moving down from mobile, about 400 pixels. Again, you might have many of these if you're on an actual kind of big website. Then I want you to go down to a single column. That's just one fractional unit, or I could just put 100%. Size the rows automatically again, and this is how I want it to be laid out. I've also put place item center, and that's just to get my tree at the very bottom in the center. And you can see there's some styling for that as well with its size and width. So that's all we need to do for when we are making our website responsive. We just set up these media queries, add their max widths, and then say what we want to happen to the container. And then we get the effect like I had in here. When we go about 770, it's going to pop down like that. And then if we go below, I think it was 400, sorry. If we go below 400 pixels, you can see in the top left here, it's telling me. I go below 400, boom, it pops like that. So that's responsive design, and it can be very useful to your users. Now, if you're sitting there and you're trying this and it's not working, it might be because you've not come back and added this part in here that we didn't come back to and talk about. And this is a tag. And what this tag does is it tells the browser that we're fiddling with the viewport. So if you were putting in that 97VH like I did all the way back here where I had 97VH, then you want to put this in here just to say, hey, we're going to get the viewport and we're going to fiddle with it. We want the width to be whatever the device's width is, and we want its scale to be 1. So you might want to pop that in there to make sure that your viewport is working correctly as well. Finally, there is one other type of responsive design that you can use, and that's called a Flexbox. So what a Flexbox does is it takes whatever the content is and it tries to figure out the best way to flexibly fit it on your website. So I've got here a simple kind of website that only has 3 different links on it, and you'll see as I change the size of this website that the items within it are moving and they're resizing to kind of fit naturally on the size of that website. It becomes a bit of an issue here when it gets a bit small, so you'd still want those media queries, but you can see that they are responsively kind of moving to the size of my website. Now, Flexbox and grids are kind of one of those online internet debates, kind of like the console wars or like PC versus Mac, that kind of thing, where some people are team Flexbox and some people are team grid. Personally, I'm team grid. But actually, I think the best way to use them is to use them together. Set yourself up a grid layout and then use Flexboxes inside of it. Now, this is an advanced skill. It's just kind of the extra for experts that we're talking about here. But as an example, this is my website, and you can see, if you look at my navigation bar here, that it is scaling and things are moving along. In fact, if I go small enough, you'll see even the content in it wraps around like that. And the reason it does that is what I've actually got in here is I've actually got a Flexbox inside that container. And if I go to my styling in my website, then if I come down to my area that has all of my navigation stuff in here, oh look, display flex. So on my website, I actually am using a Flexbox in here to kind of move the content in my navigation bar around so that it fits nicely. And then eventually it would just squish up. So I've got a media query that does that to it when it gets small enough. So that's a separate media query. But this, what's happening here, is a Flexbox. How do you learn about Flexbox? Well, I would encourage you to go to this website here. Flexbox Froggy will help you learn about Flexboxes. And also, by the way, if you're wondering, yes, there is one for grids called Grid Garden as well that will help you learn about grids. That is everything that you need to know about grids in this video. Hopefully now you can set your own one up and you can have an advanced website like this one here that looks a lot better than maybe our whale website did. I wish you the best of luck. I'll see you in the next one.